Welcome to Nevada and to the 2021 Art and Environment season. The Nevada Museum of Art has organized 5 exhibitions to serve as the backdrop for land art, past, present, futures. Gianfranco Gorgoni, Land Art Photographs, features 50 of this Italian photographer's most iconic images of earthworks in the American West. From Michael Kaiser and Walter Di Maria to Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson, Gorgoni was on the ground in the late 1960s to help bring these projects to life. For nearly 2 decades, the Nevada Museum of Art has considered what is next for land art. We've collected archives and artworks for our permanent collection that look deeply at iconic earthworks. We've asked, who are the voices that have been left out of this dialogue? And what artists are critiquing the genre's most iconic artworks? We've worked with and commissioned artists who see land as part of a larger system. And we've acknowledged those who have known this and fought for this all along. Judy Chicago began making work in response to land art in the late 1960s. Her dry ice, fireworks, and atmospheres performances offered an alternative, ephemeral engagement with the land. The Nevada Museum of Art recently acquired this archive and is debuting it for the first time. The desert has always attracted mischief makers, those artists and dreamers who see and think differently, who aim to experiment in hopes of changing the world. High Desert Test Sites in Joshua Tree, California has offered artists this creative testing ground for over 2 decades. Rose B. Simpson's monumental earthen figures ascend from the gallery floor in her exhibition, The Four. Commissioned and recently acquired by the Nevada Museum of Art, their overwhelming presence reminds us all that land art and the land itself is more than just the earth beneath our feet. Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you who are here in person, as well as our larger virtual audience that is joining us as a part of our Art and Environment season focused on land art, past, present, and futures. My name is Ann Wolf, and I'm the Chief Curator and Associate Director here at the Nevada Museum of Art. The season is a 3-month series of dialogues about the evolving field of land art, and as you saw in the short video introduction, we've organized 5 concurrent exhibitions that help to unpack what we mean by land art, past, present, futures. This talk is part of the Deborah and Dennis Scholl Distinguished Speaker Series here at the Nevada Museum of Art. I'd like to begin this afternoon by acknowledging that the Nevada Museum of Art is located in the Great Basin on the occupied territories of Indigenous people. The state of Nevada consists of 27 federally recognized tribes from 4 nations: the Nuwu, Northern Paiute, the Niue, Western Shoshone, the Washeshu, Washoe, and the Nuwu, Southern Paiute. We acknowledge that more can be done to further research and integrate the stories of Indigenous people and cultures into the story of land art and into our collective knowledge of the lands of this place. And we are fortunate to call many artists and leaders in these communities our friends and collaborators. I would also like to acknowledge the artist elder Jean Lamar, who is here with us, of Northern Paiute and Pit River ancestry, and we're here working on her major exhibition for next January. Thank you for being here, Jean. It is now my pleasure to welcome Judy Chicago back to the Nightingale Sky Room here at the museum. We welcomed her to Reno in 2018 when her work was included in the exhibition Laid Bare in the Landscape, and she was in dialogue on this very stage. And what transpired over the past 3 years, aside from the pandemic that we'd all like to forget, is nothing short of incredible. Within a few months of Judy's visit here, the Center for Art and Environment here at the Nevada Museum of Art acquired for its permanent collection Judy's entire dry ice, smoke, and fireworks archive. That means that all of the photos, sketches, slides, notes, records, receipts, and documentation related to the creation of Judy's atmospheres since the very beginning now reside right here with us in Reno in our research library and archive. We're also beginning work on a major publication to bring all of those materials to the world.
So obviously, Judy is known the world over for her commitment to feminist art and to feminist art education, her iconic and monumental dinner party, many of her other significant bodies of work, including the Birth Project, Power Play, the Holocaust Project, and most recently, The End, a meditation on death and extinction. However, today, we will focus on the ephemeral, time-based performance works made with unconventional materials, including dry ice, colored smoke, and fireworks that she created from 1967 to 1974 and from 2012 to the present. These works offer a critical counterpoint and essential context to the earthworks made by predominantly male land artists working in the deserts of the American West during the 1960s and 70s. And I can think of no one more qualified than our very own Bill Fox to be in conversation with Judy today. William Fox is the Peter E. Poole Director of the Center for Art and Environment here at the museum, and with a lifetime of research and scholarship on land art under his belt, I can tell you I am very much looking forward to their conversation. So Judy, Bill, please join me on stage. And Bill will be happy to moderate some questions both from our in-person audience as well as our virtual audience after their conversation today.
Well, thank you, everybody. Ann, thank you so much for that introduction and lead-in. Let's see if this, oh, it does. It's magnificent. This is wonderful. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. It's really nice to look out these wonderful windows and see just a bit of snow up the top of the mountains for the first time in so long. So it's a pleasure to be in the presence of weather as well as all of you.
I'm sorry, could we do something about that light that's right in my eye?
Oh.
Sorry.
Do we have someone who can actually redirect this light a little bit? Or just... Thank you.
Hi.
So Judy, what a pleasure to be here with you on stage. I mean, it's been 3 years. I was standing in back with staff, and you were up here with Philip Kaiser, and so I'll talk just a little bit about that. And let me thank some people in the audience first, and then we'll get started. So this is the only event in the 5th iteration of an Art and Environment season here at the museum. It's something we started in late 2008. We do it every 3 years. This time it's 4 years around because of COVID. And this is the only in-person event that we're doing. We just felt as a responsibility to you that we couldn't really do a lot of in-person events this time around. So everything has been digital except for this one. And we didn't also feel that it was proper to do an event with Judy and try and be in conversation with you virtually. It's not the same. So it's just like when you said, Bill, you've got to come see a smoke project. Well, yeah, you've got to be in person. So Donald Woodman, who is Judy's remarkable photographer husband, is right back there underneath that offending light. And we may call upon you, Donald, as well as Chris Souza, who is here right. Where is he? Okay, good, right there, yeah. Okay, so Chris is the 6th generation leader of a remarkable group, the Pyro Spectaculars by Souza. It is internationally one of the most revered pyrotechnical crews in the world, and a group that Judy has worked with since 2012, I think, so in Pomona. If you were here 3 years ago, in January of 2019, would you raise your hand, please, if you saw Judy speak here then? So just a few of you. That helps Judy and me calibrate a little bit, I think, about how we'll talk tonight. So Judy was here on stage with a legendary independent curator named Philip Kaiser. He's one of those remarkable guys who grows up in Switzerland and has this pan-European education into everything. And he curated a show with Mi-Wan Kwan from UCLA called Ends of the Earth in 2012. And it was the first big, large-scale survey of land art that had been done in the world. I think so. I think it was the largest show, actually, that had ever been done. And this, by the way, our show that you see now, our building, is now filled with the 2nd largest iteration of land art that's been done. So we're hot on Philip and Mi-Wan's heels. And that's it's not coincidental that Judy would have been in conversation with him here to talk about the Atmosphere's work, which Philip considered to be land art, even though it takes place up in the air. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And so, it's not coincidental that she is here tonight, that her archive of the Atmosphere's projects is here. And that was the first event that we had in this series this year, the first online event, was a conversation with Philip and Miwan. So there's a very, very conscious design to the narrative flow of all of these events from September through November. The last thing I think I need to do is, at least in this part of the event, is to thank some people who very seldom get thanked in public venues like this, and that's everyone who works at the Center for Art and Environment. So Sarah France, our archivist, who basically organizes everything that comes in through the door. We have 1.5 million items, so it's a lot of material to keep track of. That's Sarah's job. Megan Bellister, who is our assistant archivist, then prepares everything basically so that it's all tidy in digital files and eventually goes online. Stanley St. John, who is our archivist technician, archive technician, he scans everything. I calculated recently how much work Stan has in front of him. We have about 100,000 slides we have to digitize. It's a little more than 8 years of work of him working 40 hours a week. So he's very important to us. Christine Smith, who is our archive assistant, and then Rachel Perkins, who I think is sitting over there, who is our assistant librarian and archivist. Those people, each of them has touched every single thing of Judy's that has come through the door. That's how much work it takes to prepare these materials and to winnow them down into an exhibition that Joanne Northrup started and that we all carried out. With that, Judy, I think we can go to images, and I have a clicker here, I've been told. Let's see if I can make said clicker work. Oh, all right. So, Judy, dry ice is one of the strangest materials in the universe. I mean, it's a solid form of carbon dioxide. It sublimates. It starts to go directly from being a solid to being a vapor at 109 degrees minus Fahrenheit. I mean, it's a very strange material. So you put it at room temperature, and it kind of just slowly boils away and makes an atmosphere. How on earth did you come to decide you wanted to do that work with Lloyd Hammerl, then your husband, and Eric Orr?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer because I did it in 1967?
Yeah, 68, I think. 67 in Century City, yeah.
There was a group in L.A., where I started out. I can't even remember. It wasn't EAT. I don't know. It was something art and technology. And ARCO was developing Century City. And they wanted to bring attention to Century City. And so they invited all of us to do pieces there. And how I decided, I know, I hated Century City, and I hated what it looked like, and I wanted to disappear it.
So Century City, it's in kind of the western part of Los Angeles, and it's a mall. It's a
high-rise.
And it's surrounded by high-rise apartment towers. And it's sort of aged relatively gracefully, I think, given what they started out with, which wasn't much. It's modernist boxes, right?
Right.
And I love this because I think it's the only black and white image I'm going to show. There's so few images of your work in black and white compared to the amount of color things that, Donald has overwhelmed the world with color images right in your archive. And I just love this young woman plowing through, this kind of puzzled, like holding her arms out, like, what on earth is this? She's experiencing.
Let me tell you who that was.
Oh, yeah, who is it?
Okay. My first patrons were Stanley and Elise Grinstein in Los Angeles. They were legendary collectors and patrons, without whom a lot of Southern California art would never have been made, including mine. And they had 3 daughters, and that was the youngest daughter, Nancy. And at the DeYoung last Saturday, there was Nancy and her sister Ellen, her older sister Ellen. And for us, the longevity of our relationship and the fact that they grew up with my dry ice and smoke pieces, because the Grinsteins went to every single one of those early pieces in the 60s and 70s with their kids. And now Nancy also serves on the board of Through the Flower, our nonprofit. So
right.
Every time I see this, of course, they love to see this picture, the girls.
Well, it also, this pictorial photograph also says something that's very important about your atmospheres, and that's that they are inhabited. So they aren't artworks that are separate from the world, that are just floating in the air above everybody's heads. They're actually things that you walk through, that envelop buildings, and that are part of the life of the city or wherever it is that you're doing, if it's on the beach in Santa Barbara or if it's in Berlin. So it's one of my favorite photographs. Yeah. Oh. Another, so this is a dry ice environment, number 1/2. And this is still Century City, 67. And
this was the first time I used road flares.
So this is part of the train of the conversation today.
Yeah.
I once said to you something about welding, and you said, I never welded. Well, it must be the only thing you never did. I mean, you've worked in bronze, you've worked in plastic, you've painted car hoods, you're working in ceramics, stained glass. I mean, you're one of those people who just mutilates every medium possible to make wonderful things, right? I mean, you're a terrific manipulator of materials. I think this being the most difficult of all the materials you work with. So I wanted to show, well, no, the atmospheres, period.
Oh, in
I think
general.
it's so ephemeral and intangible at a sense. Although I think at the end I'm going to show some slides so that people can see how muscular the smokes actually are. But so here you're using, as you say, the first road flares that you continue to use today. And we'll see them in different slides to kind of come in and out of focus.
But by the way, go back for a second. There were 2 dry ice environments in Century City.
Mm-hmm.
One was low walls, and the other were ziggurats.
Right, you can see on the right-hand side
right,
there.
Right, but the thing is that I got the dry ice company to donate 37 tons of dry ice.
We have a great photograph of you with big gloves on, muscling these things around. So, well, good for you. 37 tons.
37 tons.
And it just disappears into thin air.
Yes, over 24 hours.
Yeah,
and actually, I want to say something. When I was commissioned by the Getty, for Pacific Standard Time to pick up where I left off with smoke and dry ice, we built another dry ice piece, which is in your show, called Sublime Environment. And the thing about it was we worked with a alternative architectural company run by a woman named Jenna Didier. Jenna was the first person to actually understand the dry ice and how completely subversive it was, and that it was a critique of the kind of construction and architecture and building at Century City.
There's nothing ever simple about a gesture she makes, right? There's always something that she's, playing with. And that's why, well, we're going to look at several of these works where you actually, you take buildings apart in a very pleasant way, a very beautiful way, but you're still taking the buildings apart. So I usually don't use notes like this, but this is an event of magnitude that's going to be seen more than by 2 people, so I thought I should probably be organized.
I'm glad somebody is.
Yeah, jeez. Assuming I can hit the right button. There we go. Smoke guns in the park. This is the only instance I have evidence of you using such a device.
That's the only time I did. The woman, Susan Titleman, I went to school with, and she's actually married to Ry Cooder.
Oh, jeez.
And everybody know who he is? Yeah, right, okay. So you can see, though, this is, I think, one of the first, what I used to call atmospheres from the dry ice. You can see that then I got interested in being able to be more directional in terms of where the smoke went. And so at this point, I was organizing artist events in a park called Brookside Park in Pasadena. And a lot of like Jim Terrell did a sky piece for one of those. In fact, there was a really funny story around Jim Terrell. Will you give? Okay. So Jim, there was an art historian named Kurt von Meyer who wanted to do a piece in which he sat zazen, which he did. And I don't know why he had a live turkey. I can't remember. All I know is he was sitting zazen and he had a live turkey. And Jim Terrell, who was a Quaker and like me had a certain animal sensitivity, he was really upset about, I don't know, I think Kurt was maybe going to do something to the turkey, like sacrifice it or something. So Jim decided to steal the turkey. So he stole the turkey while Kurt was sitting zazen, and he got upset and got up, but his legs had fallen asleep, so he couldn't follow him. So there was a collector named Betty Friedman, I think, in L.A., and she had an all-white convertible that Jim absconded with the turkey. And the turkey, of course, was terrified. And all I remember is the turkey pooped all over Betty Friedman's white convertible.
That is not the picture we have of James Terrell today.
You know, now that he's become Moses?
Well, he looks like he's got his big beard and that deep voice and the resonant personality. So thank you for humanizing James Terrell. That's great.
Okay, so
good.
anyway, so
Yeah.
as that, I think at that first artist event in Brookside, I got Susan, and she and I walked around the park with these, and you know, people just followed us. There's some great pictures of, like, you know, everybody in the park, kids following us around, and of course the park was filling with this white smoke at a time where, you know, we never got a permit.
Those were the days.
Those were the days, right.
So this is a very famous, I think, image of your early work, the purple atmospheres that you're doing on the Santa Barbara Beach.
Santa Barbara Beach,
Yeah. And you know, at first when I first saw this picture, because I didn't see it large like this, I saw it in a very small format, I thought it was the desert, right? And when I found out it was the beach, I thought, well, like, how did she end up on a beach doing an atmosphere? Because, I mean, why not? But on the other hand, it's not a place that I typically associate with you at that time, although I was wrong. Because I think about the fact you worked on the shores of Merritt Lake, for example. You know, they're Miami. I mean, there are different places where these atmospheres are in association with water. So how did this come about?
It was not, a lot of these early pieces were not, you know, very few until recently have been commissioned. It was the same thing. You know, I had this group of friends, the Grinsteins, and other friends, and I started deciding I just want to go to a beach, to a desert, to the national forest, believe it or not, with magnesium flares. Oh my God, I know. Anyway, so I called everybody up. I said, we're going to go to Santa Barbara. Meet me at the beach. So they all came. Everybody did something, because I was always into collaboration. Some people lit flares. Some people took pictures. Other people brought food or snacks. And the amazing thing was, you know, I just did this big piece in San Francisco in front of the De Young that is in connection with my retrospective. And the sponsor of that piece, George Schnitzer, invited an LA artist named Chuck Arnaldi. Chuck Arnaldi, when he came out of Chouinard, helped me light flares around the pool of what was then the Pasadena Museum, which is now Norton Simon. So, I mean, you know, the history of these pieces is very rich and related to Southern California, and which was very different, much less developed then. But, you know, I wanted to light flares everywhere.
And you did.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. So, now,
that's in front of the Santa Barbara Museum.
and so if you had to pick up, especially in those days, if you had to pick a mainstream, you know, older, white, settled, you know, patronage system to critique, that's the building that you would kind of play with, right?
Well, the thing is, this is one they invited me to.
They commissioned, I know.
But the thing that was so cool is I did it yellow and red and orange smoke across the front on a ledge. And, you know, this is the middle of my, like I was really struggling in the macho LA art scene. So the idea of setting the damn museum on fire was very appealing to me. But afterwards, the smoke made burn marks, because this was much more less, now they make non-toxic smokes and it wouldn't have done that, but it made burn marks along, and they were very regular, like where I placed the smokes. And this is incredible. The museum had docents explaining to people that this was the residue of this piece.
That's a little different from the reaction that Michael Kaiser got in Detroit when he did Drag Mass.
Oh, really?
And he takes a 30-ton block of granite or whatever,
right.
and he has it dragged by a couple of tractors onto the lawn. And of course, it destroys the lawn of the museum. The people come the next day, and the board's looking at this, and the curator had to resign, Sam Wagstaff. So it's very interesting, and you succeeded. You wanted to turn the relationship, the power relationship, upside down in this, and in a way that was beautiful. So you're making a lovely gesture, but it's still making the point, and I think that's pretty interesting.
Well, also, the fact that the museum claimed it, it wasn't like those marks were going to stay there forever. Once they power washed it off, it was gone. But, that was part of my critique of monumentality and the imposition of these, not so much this building, but so many other inhumane buildings on us.
And I want to say that the Santa Barbara Museum of Art is a revered institution. It's one of our sister institutions, if you will, on the West Coast. And we have tremendous respect for how they treat artists, different populations, and so forth. This was in history. So I want to make sure I'm clear about that.
Oh, this is in Brookside Park, too.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can see how people are all lighting the flares. In fact, this is something, when I started working with pyrospectaculars, which is, so many fireworks are completely computerized now. At that time, we just hand lit everything. And it's something Chris and I wanted to bring back, was hand lighting, which we've done. We've wanted to kind of bring the hand back in, because of course, he grew up with fireworks and he was like lighting things all the time,
He still has all his hands.
Yeah, right. Yes, he still has all his hands, yes, no. But anyway, that was one of the it was a kind of a ritual thing. And now when we do, like a piece you saw in Berlin that was hand lit, was hand ignited, and we like to do that. We like the sound that it makes. We like the idea of, it's kind of like, inventing fire, making warmth, in this case, making color.
Yeah, it's great when Donald comes, you're set up on a stand, and you've got, the technicians ready to start the sequence of everything. But Donald walks out first, with a little torch, and he bends down to that first road flare and lights that thing, and everybody goes electric, because the anticipation has been so great to see, well, how are they going to do this? How's it going to work, right? And it's wonderful to see a live human being come out and start that. So,
right.
Yeah.
This is the one Chuck Arnaldi worked on.
And this is the Norton Simon.
Yeah, this is Norton Simon. Well, it used to be the Pasadena Museum. Now it's the Norton Simon Museum.
And this is a creation not only of a beautiful atmosphere, but it's a really successful, again, erasure of a building.
Well, now also the other thing is, by this time I was getting more complicated, and this is the same period I was doing like Pasadena Lifesavers, and I was doing my domes where there's a color at different levels, and I was doing a lot of color studies to see how to use color emotively. And so when I actually did diagrams, the Pasadena Museum printed this diagram. We have it somewhere in the archives. But anyway, the color is diagrammed in terms of how they were laid out in circles all around the pool. And this is an early example of mixing color in the air, although now we're much, much more sophisticated about it and use much more smoke. like we did in the De Young, where we tiered it and we designed it so the color would go up the spectrum, down the spectrum, mix, sideways mix. But this is an early example. It's also an early example of how this work was not taken seriously. You know, it wasn't until Philip did the Ends of the Earth show that my smoke pieces were put into the context of land art. And when Philip and I did that talk here, that was the first time I ever spoke publicly about this work, even though it stretched back all the way to the end of the 60s. And there was the guy who ran the Pasadena Museum then was named John Copelands. He went on to be the editor of Art Forum. But anyway, they did this brochure advertising the piece. They did not talk about it as art. They talked about it as Judy's extravaganza, color extravaganza, as if it was an act of entertainment and not a work of art. I got into a huge fight with them, and I was really furious. But that was the degree to which my work was completely marginalized because, you know, what was land art? Land art was Richard Serra cutting down the redwoods and piling them into the main gallery at the Pasadena Museum. I think I probably told the story about that when I was with Philip.
Most people here haven't heard it, so I think you should go ahead.
In 1965, when I was living in Pasadena, Richard had a show at the Pasadena Museum in which that was the main gallery. Was he cut down redwood trees and had them brought to the museum and piled them in the middle of the gallery. And you know, redwoods were already endangered then, and I was so upset by it. And I walked up to him and I said something about it to him. And the next morning there was this huge pounding on my studio door. My studio was upstairs, and I went downstairs, and there was Richard Serra waving Art Forum. And he said to me, "You may not like it, but they do." And the reason that's important is because that was the accepted definition of land art. Nobody questioned it. Nobody raised one iota of criticism as these guys started going out in the landscape, bulldozing the landscaping, destroying the landscape. Not a word. And the fact that it took until Philip's show before that's not that long ago. That's less than 10 years ago. So it's only in the last 10 years that all this work has come into the art discourse.
Well, things have changed, and in part because of your work, they changed. So it's a very interesting thing to talk to an artist where the world has changed around you, and you've been part of the mechanism to make that change. So it becomes a very complicated conversation, and it's very. I wish I were going to be here 100 years from now to have this conversation again, because how will it have changed then? I mean, I'd be very curious, very interesting.
That's too long to live.
Well, I know. Darn it.
Now, this is something I could never do.
Well,
now,
to smother a bridge in smoke.
On a bridge?
So this is 1971.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a show at UC Irvine. No, it wasn't called that. It was Cal State Fullerton. I'm sorry.
Fullerton, yeah.
Cal State Fullerton. It was and this is in the city. There was a curator there named Dexter Frankel, and she commissioned me to do 2 pieces. How we got away with this, I have no idea.
Did you guys get the public safety people involved at all, or? Jeez.
All I remember is lining them up and igniting them.
Yeah.
In California, no less.
Where it has the strictest regulatory environment you can imagine now. Yeah. So here's the first image that I remember seeing of your work.
Oh yeah. Right.
So it's 1972, Immolation, and I took this as being, I found it remarkable because it's like first, the most immediate thing I have is this is about the strength of a woman, the female figure in the landscape, because she is nude and vulnerable, and she's in what looks like dangerous smoke, right? Because it's flame colored, and there's a little fire in front of her and so forth, or the canister's burning. And I thought it was one of the shocking things I'd ever seen. I was just,
Really?
I mean, I thought it was great, and that's why I thought it was, it was shocking, because and great and shocking were synonymous in my mind, right?
You must have been 12, right?
Well, I'm older than I look, which is, so I'm 19.
I don't mean because you were shocked, just because that must have been a long time ago.
Well, it was, I graduated from college from Claremont in 71.
Oh,
So
that was around this time.
yeah, so I mean, I was in the neighborhood, so I knew who you were, and but I didn't know that before this. I was like, who is this person? What is this? Is great, and then kind of in that same vein was this photograph too, which I didn't know at the time, but have since come to know. And what's interesting to me are the it looks like vehicle tracks that are kind of, maybe it's just the footprints in the sand of people
Yeah, they're
walking,
footprints.
and it makes these circles.
We
these kind of
didn't
intersecting
draw.
circles.
We didn't. Those circles are actually. I drew the circles for placing flares where the flares went.
Okay, that explains it.
But like I said, we went to the desert. We went to the beach. We went, all over. And by this time, I was actually in Fresno, starting the first feminist art program, and doing research and discovering all these early goddess worshiping cultures. And I thought it'd be interesting to incorporate figures and to actually enact some rituals like that. We did do pieces that were like women inventing fire, and then I started painting their bodies. In the piece before, where that's actually the artist Faith Wilding. She was my teaching assistant in Fresno. But of course, I knew about sati, and which used to be described as the practice of women throwing themselves on the funeral pyre of their husbands in grief, which later became revealed as the families throwing them into the fire so they wouldn't have to support them. And so there was that, and then of course there was the overlay with because it was the time of Vietnam, the overlay with the monks burning themselves. And since then, it's like the hemisphere on the bridge. Some of those images have taken on other meanings, like terrorism in relationship to the bridge, and in terms of that image of called immolation. We've seen.
That's a really disturbing title. I mean.
Yes, well, it's a really disturbing practice, isn't it?
So this is 1974, and this is the butterfly for Oakland on the eastern shore of Merritt, Lake Merritt, and both road flares and fireworks.
Yeah, smoke.
And smoke.
Just smoke. Smoke
Is it just
and
smoke?
road flares. But what you don't have any pictures of us constructing this, do you?
No, I don't.
But
Well,
I think there are
not
pictures
here.
in the show.
Yes.
But by this time, I had gotten interested in whether or not it'd be possible to make images. Other than, but not kind of representational images. And I used something called lance work, which is a very old fireworks technique for building what are called set pieces, where, they used to teach science. I've done a lot of research in the last few years about the history of fireworks, and they actually taught science to people who knew nothing about science through these set pieces, like in the 17th and 18th century, where they would construct images of the solar system or the sky. They'd combine painting. In fact, Chris's father, Jim, he really liked to be able to bring that back, but it would be hugely expensive. So anyway, but lance work is very labor intensive. It took us like 4 days to build the form. Unfortunately, I reached the limit of what I was able to do in terms of support and also in terms of pyrotechnical support. So that was the last piece I was able to do until the Getty commissioned me. But here's something interesting. I can't remember when it was that a curator at the Oakland Museum found this. It had been completely forgotten by the institution. She organized an exhibition at the Oakland Museum of this piece, which I was very happy to have done. It wasn't that many years ago. It was in some relation to something. Maybe, I don't know if it was in relationship to a purple poem for Miami when we did a piece, or anyway, all I know is that she had discovered this, that it had been buried in their archives.
And is that when you did Sublime Environment? That was a reprise of the. I'll have a picture of that. So that's
Okay.
So now, and what happens is, here's a break in your career. 38 years. You stop doing atmospheres for 38 years. You're busy with other stuff. I mean, the show at the Millicent Rogers Museum in Taos, when I went in, and it was basically a thorough retrospective of collaboration. I mean, you were very, very busy all those years. But to pick up this thread again, I mean, that's a remarkable move. So I have it as 2012 and Butterfly for Pomona. And Pomona commissions that, is that correct?
It came out of the Getty Pacific Standard Time, and they worked, they gave money to different institutions to do different things. And it's not like I didn't want to do more. But it's really important to understand. Like at the DeYoung Museum, there's a huge mural by an artist who just died, Hung Lu. Now, she had done that painting much earlier. That painting had the potential to be an enormous mural, but there was no support for her to do that. Jordan Schnitzer actually is the one who provided the money for her to do that painting. And I said to him when we were there, Jordan, this is a really good example of what happens when a woman artist is given a level of support to be able to realize what she could be. Well, so what happened is I was not given that level of support for a very long time. And so I had to stop pursuing one path, which was my ephemeral work. And of course, it was erased. Nobody knew about it. But the Getty, because of Pacific Standard Time, do you all know what Pacific Standard Time was? No. It was, the Getty undertook this initiative in 2010 to 2012 to document and celebrate Southern California art from 1945 to 1980, 20 of which years I was working in Southern California and was actually the only woman artist taken seriously. But that all disappeared until the Getty started doing all this research. Actually, it was funny, what goes around comes around, because for a very long time, when I was in shows, I was like the only woman. And okay, so now we fast forward to 2011-12 with Pacific Standard Time. And since I was almost the only woman taken seriously in the Southern California scene, now, of course, in 2011-2012, there's no curator who's going to do a show with no women or one woman. As a result, I was in 8 museum shows. Anyway, so the Getty also did, but they had done all this research, so they discovered my dry ice pieces, they discovered some of my atmospheres, and so they did a performance festival in which they asked a lot of the artists of my generation to maybe revisit earlier pieces. Like they asked Mark de Suvro, you all know who he is, right? the sculptor, Mark de Souvero, I hope. Anyway, he had done a peace tower in 1965, which I worked on. I ran the jackhammer. But anyhow, he actually rebuilt a section of the peace tower, which almost put Glenn Phillips in jail, because Mark comes from my generation, and he doesn't go for all these permits. And the Getty was trying to get a permit for him to erect the structure, and Mark was in a hotel room, and at one point he's like, "Fuck this, I'm just gonna go clean that motherfucker up." And Glenn's like, "Oh, fuck, I'm gonna be in jail." The headline is gonna say, "Getty curator bails out Mark de Souvero." But it's a very good example of, the difference between my generation. Anyway, so I didn't want to reprise any pieces. I really wanted to pick up where I left off. One problem with doing that was that when I intersected again with fireworks and technology, they weren't making smokes. And I had to kind of learn a whole new vocabulary. As I say often, the luckiest day of our life was when we walked into Chris Souza's office. He knew all about the guy who had sexually harassed me and all that stuff, and the pyro guy when I was training. So one of the first pieces I did 3 pieces. One was in the football field. So it's like my butterfly on the shore of Lake Merritt spent 38 years floating in air until it could alight on a football field. It was very pleasurable.
It's already almost 10 of 5.
Okay.
Oh my God, this is
Go
going to go
through
over.
the slides.
It's going to go over.
Just go through the slides. See, that's Sublime Environment.
Yeah, so that
was in front of an art fair, which disrupted the art fair. Everybody came out to see it. We were going to do a second round of flares, but the art fair didn't want that because they didn't want people distracted from buying.
There you go. Now, this is Berlin, and
where we live, a small town in New Mexico.
yeah, about an hour south of Albuquerque. And I wanted the audience to see this, just to see just a naked armature as it's just beginning to go alight. And this is one of your birthday celebrations, right? This is for your 80th, I think.
Yeah.
And I love this photograph because it shows the vivacity of the colors that you can now achieve with the contemporary technology of these pigments being blown into the air.
They started making smokes again.
Oh my God, and they're so beautiful. They're so beautiful, and of course it doesn't hurt that it matches your blouse.
Well, no, Donald bought that shirt for me as a birthday present, and it just happened to match the piece.
Just happened. And I imagine Donald took this photograph.
Of course.
Okay. And then this is a more recent one. This is the one that occurred this year.
Called Diamonds in the Sky.
Yeah.
We in addition to celebrating my birthday, we also launched the Becker Avenue Arts Corridor. Our town wants desperately to develop this street as a kind of art walk, and other galleries are opening, spaces are opening, and then people were coming from all over the world. And then the pandemic hit, and so it really hurt Berlin. So this year we tried to help start up again the Becker Avenue Arts District. We did this piece called Diamonds in the Sky, and there were like images all up and down the street of like diamonds, and a lot of other galleries and spaces were open, and it was really nice.
Yeah, and so it's the shape of a diamond. We're
and a
standing,
structure.
Yes, and the hotel that's on the corner there is the residence that you and Donald bought, and that you have labored on prodigiously.
Donald.
What did I say? I'm sorry. Donald. And
I wouldn't move into it till it was done.
yes, Donald worked very hard on
Yes,
this.
he
I
worked
know.
very hard.
When it's unusual because it's a bifurcated space. It's live work, but you also both have studio spaces.
Well,
And
that's
it's-
why we liked it, because
Exactly.
it's his and her side
yeah,
equal,
so it's great.
like
So-
the world should be.
So these are photographs by Sarah France. Ann Wolf, by the way, who introduced us, our chief curator, walked down this street when we first visited a few years ago, and she said, Marfa. And
Oh, well-
because you were there. I mean, Through the Flower was, just there, and the wine, bar was across the street, and Anne was like, I got to buy real estate. This is so. I mean,
actually right.
being able to see the influence that you were having on your own environment again. I mean, it was remarkable. So this is just, I think, the flares have been lit, and this is early smoke coming up when it's still kind of white and a little bit of yellow. We're standing right at the stanchions on top of which you've got a platform that you're kind of running things. And then you can see the colors come. These are just iPhone photos, so they're not high quality. The point is, if you ever attend a Judy Chicago, smoke event, you can capture a bit of this yourself, right?
Well,
Just
it's
on
like
your
a
phone.
lot of those early photographs, right?
They're pretty, yeah, exactly. They're not high-tech cameras. So, and look at what's happening here, where you're taking apart the entire streetscape, Becker Avenue and 2nd, and you can still see the stop sign right in front of us, but everything else is erased. And the smokes are really beginning to come together. And here's a full-on atmosphere. And
Right.
your house is buried in smoke.
Yeah. But
along
I
with,
mean, this is like, if you think about the early, yellow smoke in Brookside Park, you can see how now the colors are mixing and filling the space in a much more significant way. And it's interesting because, we learned something from this. Some people got frightened by being in the smoke. Some people found it so incredible to be in pure color. And I mean, we learned something about that people who don't understand art can find the same experience that people who do understand art find exhilarating. I mean, it's something we're applying now to our bigger pieces, because our pieces have gotten bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it was great when you leaned over, Dan, you looked at me and you said, now there's an atmosphere. And you had this big smile on your face. So,
Yeah, well, that's right.
I'd like to open it up, if it's okay with you, Judy, to questions from the atmosphere about any of these, from the audience about any of the
They're an
atmospheres.
atmosphere,
Yeah, you're an
yeah.
atmosphere as well. Yeah.
Do
So
we have a
please.
mic for
And we
the
do have a
audience?
mic, and we have one
Yeah.
circulating in the back here.
So if anybody has a question, will you walk up and introduce yourself and then ask your question so we know who you are?
And this is Claire. She can actually bring you. Claire Munoz runs our education activities here at the museum. Thank you, Claire.
Oh, we were going to bring Chris up.
I just had the pleasure of seeing Judy's show at the DeYoung. It was magnificent. And the opening area where you walk in is all about death. And I had never seen that work before of yours. And I wondered if there's any association in your mind between these performance pieces and atmospheres with death. Or what comes next.
Actually, yes, because the piece on the side, the butterfly for Oakland, I very consciously thought about birth, death, and transformation, and in relationship to the butterfly in our own lives. So yes, I've been just, I had a lot of death in my family from the time I was very young, so I've always been exceedingly aware of our mortality and our fragility. And I suppose that's connected to the fragility of my smoke performances.
Chris
Right.
Souza, would you join us up here?
Yeah, Chris, will you come up here? Okay, so this is Chris Souza. Donald, he and I make as much trouble together as possible. He comes from he's a sixth generation from Pyro Spectaculars. And just in case any of you are interested in how we do what we do, Chris is going to be able to answer some of those questions. And I hope you will be interested in how we do what we do.
There's a question up here. Yeah, a couple of people. I think
Thanks so much.
Okay.
I actually have a question that's relevant to Chris and
Who are
Judy.
you?
I am Kelsey. I'm an artist and writer out of Boulder, Colorado. And my question pertains to what residents of the Western United States. I have been obsessed with land art for my whole life.
Could you just drop your mask long enough? It's hard to understand you.
Yeah, I was
Sorry.
wondering how that would work.
Yeah.
So this question comes from much love and respect. I'm curious, though, as someone who a year ago was watching ash rain from the sky and is also passionate about land art, what your overlap in or thoughts are about the role of your art and the materials and the substance literally involved in an era of worsening air quality and wildfires in the Western U.S.
Chris?
Materials.
In respect to the land art and the materials used, the materials are pyrotechnic by nature. Judy and I have spent much time in coordination, in conjunction, both from our own hearts, both for a longevity perspective, to use pieces and materials that are not hurting the environment while we are performing these pieces.
Yeah, we use non-toxic smoke. It's something that exists now. And even the road flares now, they're making non-toxic road flares. And also, it's very important what Bill said something about this in a private conversation about the wind. Okay, so in the same way the wind makes wildfires more destructive, the wind disperses the pigments we put into the sky.
Yeah, so Reno has been, under a pall of smoke for 2 months, and we didn't go outside. We didn't go hiking in the woods. Even during the COVID, the height of the COVID pandemic, there were, really good steady traffic, foot traffic along the river, people walking. Smoke hit the town and it all stopped. It just ground to a halt. So it was very interesting for me to watch the performance at the DeYoung and see all that smoke, but also, so I was watching before to try and figure out how many people were there, and I thought a couple hundred. And then I looked around, the drone panned, a couple thousand. Then it panned around, I thought, I can't count. I can imagine.
Yeah, there were 8,000
8,000 people there. It's like, wow, that's a lot of people watching a smoke event, most of whom have never experienced, San Francisco thought it had smoke. Yeah, well, that smoke event overwhelmed any sense of ever having seen smoke before. That's part of the point. It's a sublime experience. But then I'm watching the drone again, and the smoke blows away so fast, it's gone. But you've come up with protocols. I know you've been talking with museum people about the fact that people do get disoriented, and you want to have guides positioned throughout the audience to be able to say, it's okay, let's go over here, there won't be any smoke over there if this bothers you, and so forth. And I think now, it's, the historical circumstances of what the current reality is, I'm afraid the new norm for fire in the West, So it changes the relationship we have with these pieces. It's very interesting,
But also you have to realize, we're going to do a piece on the water in Toronto in June. And so what's going to happen? People are going to stand on the shoreline, and they're going to watch this piece unfold. And they are going to look at the water for 15 minutes. Look at the water. And it's our hope that it will help people really come to understand and bring a level of awe to the world in which we live, the planet on which we live, the importance of preserving it. So the intention of our pieces is to help people develop a more appropriate respect for our planet and the preciousness of it. Now, if some people take away a different message, we can't control it. But that's not our intention. Our intention is to help. For example, if you had to turn around now and you had to watch those trees for 10 minutes while pink smoke came up out of those trees, and then the pink smoke turned to orange smoke and blended with the orange of the leaves, you would have to look intently at that landscape for as long as the smoke was there, and when it disappeared, you would still be looking at the landscape.
Claire, where are you?
I'm going to pass it
but-
to our virtual audience. Christian, you have a question?
Thank you,
Sorry.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, Judy, Bill. We've got a question online from Aaron Owens. Aaron asked, after having control over your images and images of your artwork for decades, how do you feel about having your work live through social media, such as Instagram, for newer generations? Do you feel like it turns your work back into the extravaganza that you railed against earlier in your career?
Are you kidding? Do you know how many people watched the entire live stream of Forever DeYoung that we did last Saturday? I have, at this point, 17,000 viewers of the live stream. The museum has almost 10,000 viewers, plus the 8,000 viewers who were there. I got posts from all over the world, Thailand, France, Australia, thanking us for doing that piece.
If I'll say too, I know that COVID was a lot in the decision making, moving into that piece over the time, and it took almost 2 years to get to do DeYoung. And as COVID hit, we knew that there would be discomfort with people coming. So starting that live stream was a relatively new idea to these pieces. So it wasn't necessarily an extravaganza. It was really to reach more people in an environment where not a lot of people are so willing to come out in the public and gather. So
Not that there could have been any more people than there were in Golden Gate Park. It was pretty well full. But I don't understand where your question is coming from exactly. Could you stand up and drop your mask and speak a little louder so that
So this is Christian Davies, who's our Director of Public Programming.
Yeah, I know.
And he's reading a,
This is a question that's coming from online, so I don't necessarily have a way to further expand unless the audience member wants to further. It's not my question.
Oh, it's not your question.
No.
Okay, fine.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
think we have about 100 plus people watching online.
How many people?
Over 100, I would say, on our online community.
Yeah.
it's
So
about
we're
doubles
collecting
this
audience from there, and I think we'll take another question from our live audience.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And so this woman right here in front, yeah, has been waiting patiently, yeah.
Yeah, I love sunsets. I think we all
Who
love
are you?
sunsets. I'm Ann Davis. And looking outside right now even and knowing what's going to happen in about an hour, how do you choose your pigments? How do you choose the colors you're going to use to go wherever they're going to go?
site specific.
You're right. They're site specific, and
For us, when we find a site, energy happens, then it gets colorful. You know, that's really the magnitude of these pieces. When we see a site, Judy has an energy, my energy connects. That's the site, and then the colors come kind of secondary to that.
right, like at DeYoung, when they finally, we had to redesign that piece 5 times, and because of a problem with getting the site, when they finally decided to do it in front of the museum. Have you ever seen the museum? You know how forbidding that surface is. It's kind of like perfect for me, right? Let's get rid of that, but anyway.
What did I say to you?
Right, that's what you said to me. We got that'll be fun to get rid of. So actually, I was telling Bill this because now all our notes and everything come here, and I said what you're going to see is I did a little drawing, a black and white drawing of a trapezoid. Okay, that was it, a trapezoid in front of the building, and so then we started talking about. Well, we have a certain amount of depth, so maybe the trapezoid could have sides. And then, because we've been getting more complicated in color mixing, I was like, could we mix color like going up, going down, and then across? So then came a really complicated period, and the colors are the colors like that the smoke comes in. Like, I'm very upset the smoke, they used to make pink smoke, and they don't make pink smoke anymore. So now I have to mix it with red and white, but it's not the same as that pink, especially pink with the road flares is like, oh my God, it's fantastic, right? So, I mean, we work with the elements we have, the site, what we can do on the site, how big the site is, what we can, you know, how, like Toronto is going to be a whole different color palette because it's on the water. I mean, that's part of what's so interesting, what's become so interesting.
We have another question over at this side of the room.
And Claire, I think
This is the last one, right?
I think this should be the last question, yeah.
Okay, who are you?
Hi, my name is Emily Scott. I'm a contemporary art historian who works on...
Stand up, it's easier to hear you, yeah. Okay.
Got the mask down.
Yeah.
So I work on site-specific, land-based art practices from the 60s forward, and it's such a treat to hear you talk about these works. And I was especially interested, sort of going back to the moment of the late 60s, early 70s, when you were talking about some of the kind of impetuses for the working with these materials. I hadn't really thought so much before about the response to architecture, so that was really interesting. And the collaborative aspect too, to hear about today. But one of my questions was about whether air pollution at the time for you was also kind of part of what you were engaging with in the work, because there was so much concern, kind of growing concern and interest about smog and air pollution, definitely in LA, but also kind of throughout the country. And there were artists starting to do works dealing with air pollution, kind of artists
You
and
have to
architects.
realize what it was like in LA.
Yeah.
The skies were totally blue. There was no smog. I could drive from Pasadena to Irvine in 40 minutes, and now it takes 2.5 hours on smog-filled highways. So, air pollution? What air pollution?
So this was not part of the what you were responding to?
Not yet. But
Okay.
of course it became, as we went along, it began to become an issue. But the environmental issues I was already involved with and thinking about, as I told you, around the story of Richard Serra.
Yeah, that was also really an interesting
Yeah.
anecdote to add to the picture. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thanks for overcoming the lingering fears we all
Judy,
have.
Bill, Chris, thanks for being here. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, and for those of you that are subscribers to our Art and Environment season. We hope that we see you tomorrow virtually for the program No Man's Land, Women of Land Art, with the artist Mary Miss and Patricia Johansson, moderated by Lee Arnold. So thank you all again, and have a nice evening.